Hi, welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast series, where you develop the skills and tools to build a mindset for success. For more videos and content, visit our website at www.bodybrainintegration.com.
It's Nathan here from Body Brain Integration, and today I'm really excited to share a friend of mine by the name of Dr. Margie Smith. Now, Dr. Margie is a molecular geneticist. Now, a lot of us have heard a lot about genes in the past, where you hear statements like, I'm overweight because of my genes, or I'm angry because my dad was angry. But one of the things we're going to unravel today is exactly what our genes do and how we can manipulate the function of our genes to really change our lives. And as you know, having awareness around where we currently are plays a huge role in our ability to move forward. So welcome, Margie. Pleasure having you with us.
Thanks very much, Nathan. I'm looking forward to sharing the knowledge that we have today with your listeners.
Excellent, excellent. So, Margie, in the intro there, we said that you're a molecular geneticist. So for the listeners out there who aren't sure what that is, can you explain to them a little bit about what you do?
So molecular geneticists like me, we basically look at DNA. We're interested in the coding or the sequence of the DNA and specifically the letters that make up our DNA. And it's kind of simple because they're made up of A's, T's, C's and G's. So it's a very simple alphabet that we use. But the reason why we look at DNA is to determine the effects that the changes in that DNA sequence can have on our health. So, for example, there are various areas of molecular genetics or DNA investigation. So it can be in brain health functioning, and disease processes such as Alzheimer's disease. It can be cardiovascular health, and even through to looking at cancer genetics as well, which is what my background is in the area of cancer genetics and neurogenetics, and more recently nutritional genomics. So basically we like to look at DNA, and we like to look at the effects that DNA changes have on our genome and ultimately on our health.
I think it's fascinating. Just to let the listeners know, you and I met each other probably 5 or 6 years ago, wouldn't it be, Margie? It's a fair while that we've known each other now. And when I was first introduced to what a genetic test can do in terms of helping people identify areas where they may be at risk, it's incredibly powerful. And you shared stories with me in the past as well about, you just mentioned the genetic transcription regarding cancer and cancer risk. And I remember, just to give kudos to the process, that there was a person, obviously not using names, who went through a test and found out that she was very high risk in the cancer area, which triggered her to go and get tested and then get onto the treatment nice and early. So it's really powerful in terms of your ability to not only prevent disease, but also understand other areas of health that you may not be aware of. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we're sort of talking about preventative health, Nathan, and the example that you gave, that particular person had some symptoms, and when she read the genetic report, thought, oh gosh, that sounds like there might be a trigger there, and went and had further investigation. So in the area of preventative health, it's really important to understand your DNA so that you can use nutritional inputs and exercise inputs and lifestyle changes to better manage the preventative health arena before you actually develop disease. If I could use myself as an example, my inflammation profile is not particularly wonderful. I have a lot of gene variants that mean that I have a lot more inflammation in my body generally. However, I used to go and run 10Ks every morning, and I affectionately refer to myself as the racing sardine at that time. I love to go out running, but quite a few years down the track, I'm now I now have worn out my knee joints. So if I'd known about my inflammation profile, I would probably have mixed up my exercise regime to include sort of less weight-bearing stress on my knee joints, maybe doing some swimming or cycling, but also would have been probably a bit more focused on nutritional inputs such as turmeric or those curcuminoids, omega-3s, and more of an anti-inflammatory style diet. So whilst I'm now managing that health aspect for myself, what we can do is actually stop other people from heading down that path. So that preventative health area is hugely important.
It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. It's almost, to give it an analogy, when you get an X-ray, you can see what's going on with your bones, which you cannot see from the outside. But with a genetic screen, you can see exactly what's happening at a cellular level and make changes immediately that can give you longevity. So it's extremely powerful. Now, to just give the listeners a bit more insight as to what's involved with getting our genes tested, usually what you do at Smart DNA is we use saliva. So you don't eat for a while, and then you get a saliva sample and a report comes back. Now, this report can be broken into different areas around nutrition, also brain health, and now there's another area looking at gut health as well. So what happens from there is you can see, it's like a traffic light system to see what regulation those genes have. So according to the genetic screen, they can be something called homozygous, which is like a high risk or high regulation, heterozygous, which is almost like the middle ground, and then basic, which is low risk. So can you give a general overview, Margie, about those different panels and the kind of things they might tell us?
So the panels are the areas that we cover in our testing. First of all is cardiovascular health. It's really important that we understand that the broad brushstroke Mediterranean style diet that's used to stave off cardiovascular disease and to certainly help those people who have developed cardiovascular disease, that broad brushstroke doesn't really work 50% of the time. Based on genetics, we will get that right and actually help that person improve their cholesterol profile. And 50% of the time, practitioners will get it wrong, and they will actually make their patient's cholesterol profile worse. And that's just using food. That's just using nutrition. So, really important to understand that. And, you've heard that expression, healthy heart, healthy mind. A lot of those same genes that are associated with good heart health are associated with good brain health as well. So that old adage is certainly, playing out to be true. Other areas that we look at, the inflammation panel that I mentioned in relation to myself. So you can certainly tell whether you've got low-grade chronic inflammation. It's really important to understand that if you're trying to lose weight, get fit, it's really important to understand that you don't want to be firing up those inflammatory agents. They're called pro-inflammatory cytokines. You don't want to fire them up. They'll actually impede weight loss, and they'll certainly wreak havoc in your body with low-grade chronic inflammation. So it'll be painful. So it's important to understand.
Definitely.
Yeah. Another area that we look at, I affectionately refer to as cellular rusting. They're oxidative stress markers. So we all are prone to rusting as human beings because we breathe in oxygen. That's just part of the process at a cellular level. So some of us can get rusty more quickly than others. So really important to understand the importance of antioxidant support, and certainly before and after exercise around those as well. Other areas that we look at are methylation. Now, methylation is a really big area at the moment in genetics and preventative health. It sounds like a really big word, but what it basically means is turning our genes on and off, a bit like an orchestra. They're the conductor, and we basically want the conductor to turn genes on and off in the right sequence, because otherwise, if we didn't do that, our genes would keep on pumping out proteins and enzymes that we may not actually need. Methylation also affects cardiovascular health. If that pathway doesn't function properly, there's some damaging products that don't get removed or reduced properly in our bodies. It can affect brain health, so many areas of health. So methylation is a very, very big area in our reporting.
It's interesting with a concussion, your genotype would require you to have 3 years cessation from exercise. So can you let the listeners know a little bit about that and why it's so important, Margie?
So when the research first started in this area, looking at recovery from a concussion or a head knock in playing contact sport, and there was a lot of studies done around a gene called ApoE, or apolipoprotein E. But there have been, since recent times, more genes have been found that can also contribute to the body's ability to recover quickly, or in some cases more slowly, to a concussion. But if you just look at ApoE alone, what happens when we get a knock to the head, like a severe concussion or knock to the head? The brain, it floods with A beta, and it's there in response to injury. Now, depending on your ApoE genotype, some people's ApoE genotype means that they're able to mop up this A beta more quickly than others. Now, the importance to that is that A beta is actually toxic to delicate brain tissue. Even though it's the primary response to an injury, if it's left there for too long, it becomes very toxic and starts to kill brain cells. So some people, based on their genetics, are able to mop it up and clear it away very quickly, whereas other people, based on their genetics, are very slow to mop it up and remove it. And obviously this is a very controversial area. If you just look at AFL football, for example, there are many examples now where players in their late 30s are having trouble with their memory, slurring words. So there is some damage to their brain function or brain health as a result of repeated concussions. So maybe one day we will actually see perhaps a more tailored type care to individuals who are not able to respond as well. But I think it also has some ethical issues in terms of, if players are not as quick to respond, would they make the team in the first place, Nathan? So you can see the dilemma.
Yeah. It's a really tough one, because what do you do if a player's got a very high risk of serious brain injury, but they're very passionate about sport? It's almost like some people may think we're playing God a little bit and saying this athlete is very high risk of long-term brain injury based on the nature of this sport. So do we basically govern what they should and shouldn't do? So it's understandable why it's so controversial.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that our head's not very well designed. We've got very soft tissue in an enclosed dome, and a concussion or a head knock is a rapid deceleration of your brain tissue in that confined space. So it's continually knocking against that very hard skull of ours. So whilst it's protective, when there's that repetitive action, and I think most studies have sort of shown that concussions can occur more often in training than actually in playing the game as well, Nathan. So it's not only in the actual contact sport itself, it's actually in training for those contact sports that those injuries can occur. Yeah,
it's because there's a lot of the terms you hear, like train like you want to play. So it can be just as risky, definitely. Another thing I want to share with the listeners is I went through and had my genes tested a few years ago, and I had a strong background, for a lot of people who know me personally, in natural bodybuilding. And what I found in my gene panel changed the way I operate and changed the way I eat and also train. So what happened is I'm high risk in a few markers for heart disease. And what I found was my high protein, high acidity diet was starting to cause angina. And I had a a cardiologist screened my heart to see if there was any damage, and there was no apparent holes or any visual damage. But what happened is when I started modifying my diet and also changing the way I exercise, my vitality improved out of sight, my energy improved out of sight, and also my brain function. So what you might find is you might be working against your body despite your best intentions when it comes to nutrition and exercise. So have you found that to be pretty commonplace, Margie, in your experience?
Yeah, I think it's that tension between, often the latest fad diet and actually what your genome actually needs to function properly. So it doesn't really matter whether we're talking about a Mediterranean style diet or a paleo style diet, for example, if we pick those two sort of extremes in a way. Based on your genetics, the energy sources need to be certain percentages. So if you can tweak your Mediterranean style diet or your paleo style diet more to be in sync with your genome, then that will work a lot better for you. But I agree, high protein, people do high protein to manage their weight and build muscle and so on, Nathan, and you know more about that than I do. But it's really important to understand the percentages of those energy sources that you actually need. And if I remember correctly, based on your genetics, your energy sources for protein were a bit lower, but certainly antioxidant status needed to be improved a lot. So, it's really important to understand that information and eat in style more with your genome.
I think this is a topic that really needs to get out there, because one term that you use when you open a lot of your presentations, Margie, is that one size doesn't fit all. But based on our current situation in Australia with our guidelines, we've been told that we should eat, that everybody should aim to eat a certain ratio of foods at a certain time and age. So one thing that I think is important for people to understand is sometimes having really high levels of your fish oils and your omega-3s and 6s can be different for one person versus another. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about that as well, Margie?
Yeah, so first of all, the important thing to understand is that just because we take an omega-3, it doesn't mean that our circulating levels, once we ingest it, are the same in our bodies for everybody. It can be quite different. For example, omega-3s, we know we can get them from fish sources. You can also get omega-3s from plant-based sources. Now, some people, based on their genetics, cannot utilize plant-based sources of omega-3s. So that's a complete waste of time. So knowing that information's useful. And then there are genes involved with how well we actually utilize omega-3s. And based on genetics, some people, their lipid transporter is not able to utilize omega-3s. And in fact, in high dose, based on genetics, some people may actually push up their total cholesterol and also elevate their LDL, or so-called bad cholesterol, using high dose fish oils. So really, we need to be looking more at this. I think this is becoming a public health issue, whereby there needs to be more awareness over or around utilization of omega-3s, but also a range of supplements that individuals take, because it helps practitioners to understand why for example, a cholesterol report, you would expect it to improve, may actually look worse following omega-3 supplementation. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't utilize omega-3s. It's actually the dose. There's this notion, I think, that because it's a natural health product, that it's quite safe to take, and there's that notion that, if I take more, it's going to be better. And that's certainly not the case. I mean, it's the same as the pharmaceutical industry. These are potent drugs. But in general terms around omega-3s, I mean, we as human beings need to be focused more on omega-3 intake and less on omega-6 intake. We already have too many omega-6s in our diet, which are inflammatory. So having a more anti-inflammatory style diet is useful, but don't assume that just because you take a supplement that it's going to work the same way in your body that it does in somebody else's, because there are so many pathways involved in how we actually metabolize or utilize omega-3s.
Yeah. I think another really important thing we need to talk about is there's a huge drug epidemic in Australia at the moment with Australia's youth. And there's certain genes that we have, like there's a gene, monoamine oxidase A, which is a lot of listeners may have heard of the warrior gene. And it's got a lot to do with levels of aggression and anger too. So there can be people who are more susceptible to violence when we look at the research. And there's another gene as well. So that's monoamine oxidase A, but there's also our dopamine receptor gene DRD4, which has a lot to do with novelty seeking. So sometimes when we look at these genes and the regulation of these genes, some people are very high risk of violent episodes and also becoming addicted to certain drugs and substances. So Margie, could you share some of your thoughts around these areas and also the power that understanding our genes around those issues can affect us with?
Yeah, I think the first comment I'll make around addiction is that it's not that simple equation. If you have those genetic predispositions, that you will automatically start exhibiting those tendencies. When we have to think about genes in the context of our lifestyle, our family upbringing. So there are a range of other impacts, even religious beliefs. So for some individuals, they may have those riskier genotypes that make them more vulnerable, but unless they have that exposure or they see other family members behaving in a particular way and they have that learned type response, then they may never exhibit those particular traits that are associated with those genotypes.
Yeah.
It really, I think it then, leads us to sort of contemplate a little bit more about our brain itself and what it actually is. I mean, it performs some very complex operations, but the brain is very much focused on pleasure and reward, and our brain will certainly make us or push us towards repetitive actions that we derive, or your brain derives some pleasure from. Quite simply, that can be from something like exercise, it can be certain foods, and then probably at its worst with alcohol and drug addictions. So, for example, the dopamine receptor, you mentioned DRD4, there's another friend of his called DRD2. It sounds a little bit like Star Wars or something, doesn't it? So DRD2 is associated with dopamine levels, and I sort of refer to that as how much biochemical happiness we have. So if you have a particular gene variation, we know that those individuals don't produce as much dopamine. And what we're seeing from our research is that individuals who have that sort of lower levels of dopamine, you'll find that they will often tell you that they have a little square of chocolate every day. And you might think that's unusual, but the thing is that chocolate actually has a lot of the building blocks to make dopamine. So the brain is associated having a piece of chocolate with actually feeling better, having an improved level of biochemical happiness.
Yeah.
So in a way, change people's consciousness around why they're actually doing something when they may not actually think about what they're doing and why they might be doing it. So then you can start looking at other ways to improve dopamine levels naturally in those individuals. So it's a complex story, I think, Nathan, and probably one worth exploring in more depth later, perhaps in another podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a really important thing, just to sort of bring it back a little bit, is that a lot of people will say, I am the way I am because it's my genes. But having worked together in the past, we have seen some profiles from people who are extremely fit and healthy and great advocates for health who have been homozygous for FTO. So it's proof in the pudding that absolutely you can turn up or turn down the volume of those genes like an orchestra, like you mentioned. So just for those listeners, FTO is about our fat cells and our tendencies to put on weight. So a lot of people will say, I'm big because my parents are big and my grandfather was big, and it's just a dominant gene. So do you find that to be a common conversation you tend to have around people blaming their genes?
Okay, so the gene you're talking about is the FTO gene. I affectionately call the fatso gene.
Yeah.
If you have 2 copies of that risky genotype, then what we know is that people tend to reach for carbohydrate-laden foods more. Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting. They have very poor control of leptin, so they don't get a full signal. So when
Can you
they sit down,
explain leptin, Margie? What's
leptin?
Yeah, leptin.
Leptin's a little hormone that sends a signal to say that we're actually full. You've had enough to eat. We should stop. That control, that signaling is very sloppy in those individuals. So they tend to overeat more. But if you want to talk about the really cool thing about epigenetics, basically turning that around, exercise means that you get better control of that gene. So basically what happens is when we don't exercise, that gene gets locked down. When you exercise, you basically throw off those locks. You get better control of leptin. And if you can get those individuals to eat a lower fat diet with protein at every meal, they will start to get better control of leptin. They won't be reaching for carbs, and you can start to help them to lose weight. So it's not your destiny. Just because other family members were overweight doesn't mean that that's your destiny, because there's a whole bunch of other things that are happening. Children get their cues from their parents around food.
Yeah.
If parents are eating a particular way, kids will follow suit. So it's not just your genes, it's your nutritional environment and lifestyle. So in terms of exercise and protein, that's a really good combination. And I'm not talking vast amounts of protein. I'm just saying some protein with every meal helps those individuals. But there is certainly a propensity to put on weight, and I think our nutritional environment just exaggerates that particular genetic issue around weight gain.
Yeah, wow, it's so fascinating. I think these sorts of topics don't get discussed that much. It's not really commonplace. When I did exercise science at university, we didn't talk about genetics, yet it has such a dynamic interplay with our performance and also with our recovery. So some people, we were talking about the inflammation markers a little bit earlier, don't recover as well as others. So can you talk a little bit about the recovery and regeneration side of things, Margie, just for those people who feel like they're burning the candle at both ends?
Yeah, the thing around exercise, Nathan, is that we probably all agree that everyone will tell us the latest event that they are going to compete in, and they talk a lot about that. No one ever talks about how they're going to recover from it.
No, they don't. They absolutely don't.
And that's a problem. It's fine to compete in the event, but how are you going to pull up afterwards, and how are you going to manage your levels of pain and just overall recovery? So yeah, if you do have one of those inflammatory type profiles, probably a really good idea to look at making sure you've got some curcuminoids there in the foods that you're eating. Or supplement. I mean, curcuminoids, just so you know, it's like turmeric. They're the most potent anti-inflammatory agent on the planet, better than any pharmaceutical drug. They certainly work. So if inflammation is a problem and you're thinking about your recovery, it's probably a really good idea to start looking at having some turmeric or curcuminoids in your diet, omega-3s. Some people don't remove lactic acid from their muscles very well at all. They have very slow removal of it, and hence a slower recovery. So this is where you can start looking at magnesium, for example, to assist in recovery. after a strenuous event. So yeah, really important to understand how your body pulls up. Even your methylation genes, the genes that turn other genes on and off. People talk about making sure that they have a good intake of folate. But the problem is, if your gene has a genetic fault in it, then topping up on folate may not be the best thing because your body can't utilize it. You may need to have a form that is already methylated. And that's where understanding your genetics can really be very helpful.
Yeah.
So, same with oxidative stress markers, Nathan, your rusty genes, making sure that you've got, good antioxidant status.
Margie, we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but what I want to do, just because we're conscious of time as well, is I want to talk a little bit about your book. Now, I was so excited when I saw that you'd written a book called Gene Genius, because I've learned so much from our conversations and your mentoring, both you and Simone. And the book launches in a week's time. And I highly recommend to the listeners to check out the book that Margie's written. So can you give the listeners a quick overview about what the book is about and the sort of things they'll take away?
So we've covered a whole lot of health areas in the book, from cardiovascular disease through to exercise, through to taking care of our kids, and what we can do to take care of our children. So basically it's about understanding your DNA and how to create a genetic roadmap for your health and happiness, and to give people more insights into themselves. And there's probably areas there that will really have some resonance for them, and to help them to understand what may be happening with their genes and DNA changes in their genes. They may be able to relate to some of those parts in the storyline.
So guys, there's so much you would have learnt from today, understanding that our genes are not predetermined. They can, like volume switch, you can switch them on, switch them off, depending on your lifestyle and how much support you have with your nutrition, and also other factors like looking at our stress and our recovery. So just like we said a bit earlier, you get an x-ray done to see what's happening with your skeletal system. But when you get your genetics done, or when you get your genetic profile, you see what's happening at a cellular level. And as you guys know out there, all the good coaches know that all our building blocks start from a cellular level, up to tissues, up to organs, up to systems, and up to the human body organism. So it's really important for us to understand where we are currently at in order to move forward effectively. So Margie, thanks so much for your time. I'm looking forward to doing some more interviews with you in the future regarding the sport and exercise profiles and some other key areas too around addiction. So thanks so much, Margie.
Thanks very much, Nathan, and I hope your listeners enjoy the podcast.
No problem. All right. Speak to you soon, Margie.
Thanks. Bye, Nathan.